morning to all. In today's session, we are all going to learn what is all about trade policy and labor laws. So let's begin with the definition of the trade policy. A trade policy is actually a government policy which always reflects the number of goods and services a country could able to export or imports. It is a place where the government which automatically affects the number of goods and services which the exact country would export and import in a systematic manner, and if any issues or concern arises in that particular aspect, the policy makers will always employ a trade policy so that it not only benefit to the domestic market but also the domestic industries as well. When it comes to the trade policy, there are two major concepts which has to be followed. That is the free trade and protectionism. When we talk about the free trade, it is a situation when there is no government rules, restrictions to put on the trade in a particular country. But when we talk about the protectionism, it's when the government puts certain trade regulations or restrictions so that it could help to the domestic industries and the domestic market where they can able to export and benefit to the industries. So that is called the protectionism. So in a particular economy, there is a spectrum of the trade policy where the country or the government, which always follow the policies in terms of import and export of goods and services, whether it's related to the domestic industries or the international industries as well. So on the one hand, there is a free trade where there is no government regulations, but on the other hand, there is a protectionism where the government plays a very significant role to put up a trade restrictions so that they could help the industries. So automatically, so that it also prevent the malpractices services as well. When we talk about under the protectionism, the government always regulate the trade which flow in and out of a country so that they can protect the domestic industries and limit on reliance on other countries as well. Even the most of the countries are not one or the other, but are located somewhere on this particular spectrum that is called the protectionism. And that is all about the overview of a trade policy. Let's come to the next most important concept, that is the foreign trade policy. The foreign trade policy, it always reflects the international market where the two countries would come together to engage into a formal agreement, and which always a part of the you can say international organizations such as WTO, World Trade Organization, and International Monetary Fund. So always the particular market, the international market, which has to be agreed and follow the principles which has been decided by the multiple nations, which always a part of the WTO and International Monetary Fund. And these organizations are almost created to support the international trade, which could be flow in a fair or a sustainable manner, so that it will benefit to all of the nations and its member nations as well. So automatically, the trade policy is usually set by the nation government. So if the policy is too drastic, or you can say is devastating to another nation economy, then if any of the country or any of the nation government automatically facing a situation of drastic or devastating to another nation economy, then automatically WTO, the World Trade Organization, or the International Monetary Fund they come together, being as a mediator to keep the peace and come up with a possible action. When we talk, there is a situation, a case when the Trump administration placed around $2,000 billion worth of tariffs, which has been imposed on the Chinese imports during his presidencies. When we talk about the WTO, which always stated that tariffs were in valuation of the global trade policy, global trade body rules because they were against China, it could not be proven that the domestic industries were actually benefited from the tariffs. So automatically, when the Trump has imposed the tariffs on the Chinese imports, it automatically does not reflect, it does not actually benefit to its member nations, and it all such tariffs which has been imposed by the Trump, it always in evaluation of the global trade, and automatically WTO has come forward and it's proved that the domestic industries, you can say, couldn't be benefited from such tariffs as well. So automatically, foreign trade policy are meant to reduce the barriers between the trading nations or two trading nations or the member nations who are involved into a foreign trade or the, you can say, deals in the international market. And it always produce the non-discriminating trading policies and always make the trading process more transparent through the use of international organizations like WTO and the International Monetary Fund. So that is all about the foreign trade policy with a small case of the Trump case, Trump administration case, where has been imposed a tariff which is against the, you can say, the China, which couldn't be proved at all in this particular scenario. Next concept is what is import substitution industrialization. So when we talk about import substitution industrialization, it is an economic policy which always aims to the development of the domestic industries and always try to reduce the reliance on the manufactured foreign imports. It is a prominent policy in the 20th century which always focused at how to depend on their domestic, you can say, markets rather than the manufactured foreign imports. And it always try to give a to encourage and motivate the other countries that to reduce their dependency on the developed countries, and as a result it is always aims to reach out the to make out the industries or domestic industries and always become the self-sufficient. And this policy is almost lost in that particular century, the half of the century at that particular time, that is 20th century. And it always focus on the four main factors, that is the government subsidization of the selected industries like cement, you can say diesel, petrol, etc. Protectionism, where it always put trade regulations and restrictions. Nationalism, it always focused on the national boundaries on the domestic markets or the industries, and of course it always tried to increase the taxation rates which has been come up, you can say, under the annual budget by the central government. Import substitution is always try to reduce the dependency, and how it would dependency on the foreign market. So it always aims also, it also aims to protect and build up the domestic industries, the domestic products, rather than dependent on the developed nations, and create a self-sufficient internal market, that is domestic market. So it could be achieved through four main factors, that is the government subsidies, protectionism, nationalization, and increased taxation. When we talk about the government subsidies for the vital industry, the state you can see the governments which always focused upon to develop and construct the industries, which is a foundation or which is a root of the import substitution industrialization. The next one is protectionism. It always enforced the tariffs, the quotas, so that to make the foreign imports more expensive, so they can the particular domestics markets could not able to enter into the foreign markets, or the you can take the services of the foreign nations. That means in terms of the foreign trade, which becomes more expensive and inaccessible, and whatever the revenues is to be collected from the tariffs, it can be injected into industry. It can be utilized into the domestic industries rather than invested into an international market. The next one is nationalization. So when we talk about the nationalization, it always transfer the private industries into the state control. That means the state government would comes forward to control the private industries who are being limited in, or you can say restricted into the states. Next one is increased taxation. It always generate the funds to subsidize the industrial growth, which it is a manner, it is a way of doing to protect the domestic industries by generating the funds so that that can be utilized for the industries, for the domestic industries, for the domestic industries growth and development in a particular way. This is a case of the import substitution industrialization, that is Latin America. So the most prominent example of the import substitution industrialization adoption, the first adoption, the concept of this concept has been adopted throughout the Latin America. There was a Great Depression in 1930s, which was suddenly you can say hurt the Latin America export market. And later on, they realized that their heavy reliance on the natural resource export was not sustainable and made them vulnerable situation to the international market. Whatever all the revenues they made on export were actually invested on the foreign imports, which automatically harm the you can say growth and the duplication of the resources in the Latin America. So the countries which are comes under the Latin America, it suffered from the weak domestic markets, as the not small local industries, which are also leads to a major unemployment and poverty. So this particular concept, that is the you can say the import substitution industrialization, becomes an obvious solution to such problems which has been suffered by the Latin America, and many Latin American countries which has adopted this concept so that they can invest it heavily on its domestic industries, on its local industries, rather than dependent on the other nations. And the private industries are also nationalized so that such industries who are actually situated or controlled under the government, the state government will comes under such control into the private industries, and the tariffs and quotas are also put in so that they can decrease the imports and the taxes could increase to support the policy that is called trade policy or a foreign trade policy, which has been utilized under the major concept of import substitution industrialization. It is a major solution of this Great Depression which has been suffered by the Latin America in 1930s. In fact, this policy, that is the import substitution industrialization, which also is faced with the mixed results or the mixed outcomes. The countries such as Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Mexico, or ago were successful in adopting such a policy, or you can say the concept, due to the investments in technologies and planning, a resource planning, and of course, they all countries have experienced the moderate industrialization. At some extent, the unemployment has also been reduced. But on the other hand, there are also some of the countries like Peru, Bolivia, and Educa were unsuccessful, and their failure is also be dependent upon the other nations and their inability to invest in technologies, and not inability to also to develop the local industries in their particular states or the provinces or in their own country, and ultimately leads to major unemployment. And as a result, it always back to the exporting the natural resources rather than make up to have a strong background of the local industries within their own countries. So they don't focus on the local industries in their own country, rather than they again, whatever the situation has been arise, they reverted back to the start exporting the natural resources rather than make it strong a situation of creating or constructing or developing the local industry growth and development. Even the successful implementation of the industrial subsidization and industrialization, which always came up to the with its own merits and demerits, and industrialization and economic growth were always a favorable outcome. So automatically, the import substitution industrialization has created an unforeseen problems in the upcoming period belonging to these particular countries. The next concept or the section or the another policy which comes under the trade policy, that is called the export-led growth. Export-led growth is a significant part of how the economy or the country would expand the real GDP, gross domestic product, the jobs, the per capita income flows from a successful exporting of goods and services from one country to another country. But in the recent years, a number of countries were also experienced the same growth, a rapid growth when it comes to a number of export industries, which always help us or help the country for a long run expansion in terms of the domestic industries for the domestic industrial growth and development. And the nations who have experienced the rapid growth for a long-term period that are China, Ireland, South Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong, Vietnam, Ethiopia, and other emerging countries as well. And some of them have also experienced a marked increase in their trade, which also leads to an increase in real GDP, which actually measures the total value of trade, which also includes the exports and imports, and which always express the percentage of GDP, that it could be a 6%, 5%, 4%, then automatically they always experienced an increase in their trade. So when there is an increase in their trade, then automatically the combination of import and export, which always be measured and represented in percentage or GDP percentage. So this is the overview of the export-led growth. We can come forward the advantages of this particular concept, where the more and more of goods and services are the injections, are the solution in a circular flow of income, which always increase the aggregate demand and the output. In this way, it will also increase the per capita income and also reduce the extreme poverty and unemployment situations in the developing countries. The another advantage is a growing export sales. When there is an increase in the sales of export of goods, it always provides the revenues, the profits for the businesses, and ultimately it increases the capital investment spending. And the higher the investment would be occurred, it also increases the country productive capacity, and ultimately it increases the potential for exports. There are many industries who have also facilitate, such as the trade insurance, the logistic, the port facilities as well. So the countries who are very fast growing export sectors, automatically they increase the you can see the investment, the employment in that particular related industries like cement, steel, aluminium, etc. So one of the good example is the importance of trade to countries such as the Netherlands, which is a port of Rotterdam, and Singapore and Hong Kong, who are developed in a globe scale hubs of trade. The more and more trade, foreign trade, it always been occurred in these particular three countries. So, and this way, the export of goods and services, which always be represent a percentage of GDP for Vietnam, and that will be the 6% of GDP for Vietnam as per the statistical reports of World Trade Organization. The next concept, the policy, is the convertibility and the deficit of accounts. When we talk about the convertibility, we always talk about the currency convertibility, which always refers a right of freedom to convert the domestic currency into other international accepted currencies or vice versa. So convertibility is divided into two parts. The first one is the current account convertibility and the capital account convertibility. So let's understand the basic concept of these two terms. So the current account convertibility, it refers to a freedom when it comes to a payments or the transfer for the current international transactions. So whatever the transaction, the current international transaction happen, it always be the currencies is immediately convert into the international accepted currencies. So the capital, and on the other hand, the capital account convertibility, it's a freedom to convert the local financial assets to foreign financial assets. So automatically, when we talk about the current account, we always talk about the payments and the transfer for the current international transaction. But when we talk about the capital, it's a conversion of the local financial assets to the foreign financial assets. So automatically, whatever the rates, it totally depends upon the market exchange rates without any need of any approval from the government. In on other hand, the capital account convertibility, it always refers a complete mobility where the free or unregulated capital funds could be possible across the countries without any restrictions. So as the growth of the balance of payments, where the you can see the deficit and the implicit, it always occurs, and the India could make a rupee fully convertible on the current account in 1994. Let's come up to the statistical data of the current. So current and capital account convertibility. So how, what in what ratios that been converted, when it has been started. So the current account today is fully convertible and operationalized on August 19, 1994. It means the full amount of foreign exchange, whichever the required by anyone for current purposes will be made available at the official exchange rate, and there will be no unrestricted, you can see, outflow of any foreign exchange. So the India has also obeyed to do so as per the Article 8 of the International Monetary Fund, which always restrict any exchange restrictions on the current international transactions, as the India is always followed the rules and regulations of the International Monetary Fund since 1991. But when we talk about the capital account convertibility after the recommendation of SS Tarapur Committee in 1997 on the capital account convertibility, where the financial assets, the local financial assets convert into the foreign financial assets. So India has been moving in the direction of allowing the full convertibility in this particular capital account. So with a prior you can say required precautions. So India is still a country of partial convertibility in case of the capital account, that is 40 to 60 ratio in the capital account, but in the you can say inside the overall policy, that is a foreign trade policy, a reforms has also been made up, and a certain levels of the foreign exchange requirement is also required. So it is a economy who always allow the full capital account convertibility with the pure required precautions in this particular concept. Now we can come up as the precautions, the steps has to be taken in the direction of the capital account convertibility. So these are the various steps that has to be taken when it comes to a role to play in a capital account convertibility. So the Indian corporate sector is always allow the full convertibility in the automatic route up to rupees 500 million overseas venture. It could be invested by the limited companies in foreign countries, could be allowed. Indian corporate sector is allowed to prepay their external commercial borrowings, that is an automatic route, if the loan is above $500 million. So if the loan is above $500, it is an automatic route will be granted to prepay their external borrowings from the foreign countries. Next one is individuals are also allowed to invest in foreign assets, shares, etc. up to the level of $250,000 per annum. Unlimited amount of gold is also allowed to be imported, which is a current account rule but not feasible for everybody. So as this particular unlimited amount of gold is not allowed at present scenario. Next one is the second committee on the capital account convertibility, which is again chaired by the SS Tarapon, has handed over its report in September 2006, on which the RBI and the government have having consultations on the same. The next section is a deficit of accounts, which always relates to the balance of payment. So the balance of payment is a systematic record of all those international financial and the trade transaction which always occurred from home country to the rest of the world within a particular financial period. So it is defined as an export minus imports. So a deficit in balance of payment could be classified into three types of accounts. That is the trade account deficit, which is normally we can call it a simple trade deficit, current account deficit, and the capital account deficit. When we talk about the trade deficit, or in other words, we can call a balance of trade deficit, it always refers the excess of merchandise imports over the merchandise export. That is M minus X. And that is the balance of trade is in surplus or deficit, depending upon the difference between the merchandise import and export, whether it is in positive a sign or a negative sign. If it is a positive sign, that means the balance of trade is in surplus stage. But if it is negative, that means that same balance of trade is in deficit. Or in other words, we can call the deficit of trade accounts. Current account deficit is always increased that there is a more and more liabilities of the nation to the rest of the world. It means the excess of expenditure are more rather than the revenues on the current account in a particular country balance of payment, and that's why it refers to the current account deficit where the expenditure is more than the revenues or receipts. So automatically it harmed the health status of the economy. But on the other hand, the capital account deficit is always reveals the long-term health of the nation is deteriorating. That means it always harm the health, the financial health of the company when it comes to the capital account deficit. So almost taking all these three accounts, the balance of payments deficit is a sum of the current account deficit and the capital account deficit. So automatically the balance of payment deficit is a combination of the of the current account deficit and the capital account deficit. And mathematically, it can denote the balance of payment deficit is equal to the current account deficit plus the capital account deficit, where the current account deficit, where the expenditure are more than the receipts or revenue, and the capital account deficit, which always refers or harm the more and more financial health of the nation, and it keeps reducing. So automatically, the more and more the results into a negative, it becomes the balance of payment deficit, which is a combination of both deficit, that is current account and the capital account. Now, the next policy which comes under the foreign direct investment policy. So the foreign direct investment policies always talk about the flow of capital in terms of technology, skills, and sometimes even the market access. So automatically, whatever the important resources to be available, it always been used for the industrial development of the recipient countries, for the neighboring countries. So most of the developing countries which always welcome the attitude towards the multinational companies or the foreign direct investment plays a very significant role in fostering the growth by increasing capital accumulation, technological change, efficiency, balance of payment improvement, increase of exports, increase in the overall amount of the investment in the domestic countries, and you can say it's, and automatically when it comes to the growth by doing all these you can see aspects, then automatically it improves the access to world markets, and which helps in release of the resources constraint on investment. So this is how the foreign direct investment flows, where all these resources will be used to foster the industry growth and development, and ultimately it will open the doors to the world markets, and it also helps to release all those resources which are actually needed on doing the investments into the foreign companies. So this is the call of foreign direct investment policy. So when we talk about the foreign direct investment policy, it always, you can say, gone through the three main phases, which has been given below. That is, the first phase is 1950 to 1980. The second phase is 1980 to 1991, and the third phase would belong to after 1991, that is post 1991. So when we talk about the first phase, 1950 to 1980, during this phase, India is always focus on the foreign capital, especially when it comes to the foreign capital. That means the foreign direct investment, that is FDI, where the government is all in 1949, it always stated that there shall be no discrimination between the Indian foreign undertakings. Whatever the facilities will be given to the foreign investors to remit the profits, whatever the compensation will be paid in case of the foreign undertaking if it is nationalized. So this kind of attitude towards the foreign capital remains unchanged in the 1956 Industrial Policy Resolution. So this is how the assurance made by the Indian government in 1949, because after all, the Indian government is more and more dependent on the foreign direct investment after the independence, and it always remained changed till the 1956 in the new resolution that is called Industrial Policy Resolution. When we talk about the second phase, that is 1980 to 91, the period which always began with the liberalization of industries, and it was guided by the relaxation of the controls, which was acted by a resources constraint which on investments. So such kind of approach to industrial policy has delicensing of industries and scrapping the act that is called MRTP Act 1969. So the liberalization in this particular period was actually restricted to the limited foreign collaboration. So the industrial policy statement of 1971, it always discouraged the foreign collaboration, which indicates the inflow of technology will be allowed in a sophisticated and the high purity areas only, where the Indian technology could not be adequately developed. So if the Indian technology could not be adequately developed, then automatically the foreign direct investments on India on in India, it will always plays a significant role, and as a result the liberalization process could not be emerged fully, and it was limited to the foreign collaboration only. So this is a second phase where the liberalization process could not exist, and of course is restricted to the limited foreign collaboration. As a result, the inflow of technology could goes on if the Indian technology could not be adequately developed. The third phase is post 1991. So, with the announcement of the new industrial policy of 1991, a new phase in the FDI began. So, after following a restricted FDI policy for more than the 4 decades since independence, India has followed its liberalization processes under this policy, and it's opened up a new sectors like banking, mining, insurance, telecommunication to FDI, and of course limiting the controls and regulations which has been imposed by the foreign companies on Indian uh, companies. So the government, which also allow the huge concession and relaxation on the exports and imports. So the above measures and the period of 1991 to 1995 and the post 1995, the liberalizing measures has been you can say taken, which are as follows. The first one is the introduction of a dual route of the approval of FTI, that is the RBI, Reserve Bank of India automatic route has been opened, and the Foreign International Policy Board route has also been opened. Next one is automatic permission for technology agreements in high purity industries as well. Remove the restriction of FDI in the low technology areas and liberalize the technology imports. Permission is to be given to the NRI and overseas corporate bodies to invest up to the 100% in high priority areas. Hike in foreign equity participation, which always limit to the 51% of the existing companies. And of course, the foreign equity participation is up to the 100% for all those projects which will useful for the industrial growth, that is the electricity generation, transmission, distribution, roads and highways, dams, etc. 100% of FDI is to be invested in a telecommunication sector, T sectors, airports, etc. So after all, it involves a foreign companies collaboration. The next policy is FII, that is the Foreign Industrial Investment Policy. So the entry of FI after it's emerged after the 1992 to 1993 is just a follow-up of the recommendation of the NERSIM committee report on the financial system. So before 1992, only the non-residents India and the overseas corporate bodies were allowed to undertake the portfolio investments in India. So after the 1992, that is post 1992, the Indian stock markets were opened up with a direct investigation by the foreign, you can say industrial investors, or and through this there is a platform has been open to invest in all the securities which traded in the primary and the secondary market, including the equity and other securities and instruments of the companies which has been listed in the stock exchanges in India, like Bombay Stock Exchange, uh, you can see National Stock Exchange, any other the companies, the corporate companies, and for the nationalized banks are also involved in the listed in the stock exchange in India, where the foreign investors would also come up. So foreign investors investment policy, that also called the FII, where the foreign investors have an opportunity to invest or to participate directly through the in the Indian stock markets, and they can enter into the primary or secondary markets as well. In 1998, the Indian companies were also allowed to issue bonus shares, rights shares to the global and American depository receipts holders after obtaining a prior permissions by the Indian government. And the foreign investors were also allowed to invest in the securities of unlisted companies, treasury bills, and the government securities as well. So whatever the norms has been covered under this policy, in the convertible bonds were also being liberalized. So in short, the evaluation of the such policy in India has been taken a form in the following ways: to relax the investment limits for FII, to relax the eligibility condition, to liberalize the investment instrument which are accessible to the foreign investors' investment purposes. The next concept is what is regionalism. Regionalism is a term which has been used in the GATT and the WTO, which is, you can say, the agreements which are engaged between the two nations or the member nation in terms of referring the preferential trade agreements, that is PTA. The dictionary of the trade policy term, which always describe the regionalism, is a process to protect the reasons, the particular reasons or the areas which always comes under the control of the government, and it always facilitate the trade on the regional basis wherever the possibility or the needs arise in the reasons. So automatically RTA can always take a several forms, that is the regional trade agreements, that is the free trade areas, the custom unions, the common market, and economic unions. So automatically it is a process by rolling up the regional trade agreements, which always talk about the actions of the government to liberalize the regions or areas where the free trade could possible, and also facilitate the trade on the regional basis. And that's why the regional trading agreement will take a several forms of free trade area. Put just select the areas which comes under the free trade, impose the custom unions, or prepare the custom union policies, common markets, economic unions, etc. Free trade areas is always agreed to reduce or abolish the trade restrictions between the member countries, while the allowing members to impose their trade restrictions against the non-members. So who members, they are free trade, they are able to do, or they have an opportunity to do a free trade, but the you can say trade restrictions is to be against the non-members, which are comes under the regional trading agreements. Custom unions has always encouraged the free trade among the members of the nations or WTO, but it always erect the common external tariffs on imports from the non-member countries. So the common markets are always similar to the custom unions, and it always make up a free flow of factors of production as well as the trade. And in this way, it will integrate the services or a degree of harmony and the unity of the member states in terms of preparing the domestic policies. And an economic union will also play a significant role for the development of the common market by encouraging the harmony and unity of the national economic policies like competition policies, financial regulation, product statements, standards, policies, etc. In the past, India has adopted a cautious approach to the regional trading agreements, and in the late 2000, it recognized that the RTA, PTA, and FTA, the foreign trading agreements, the regional trading agreements would continue to play a significant role in the world trade, which always shows up the multilateral negotiation under the rules and regulation policies of the World Trade Organization. And in this way, the India has begun moving towards the you can say foreign trading agreement, regional trading agreement, and the comprehensive economic cooperation agreements like the agreement on the South Asia Free Trade Area, which is called CEFTA, Indian Asian, which is called a Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement, India Pacific Trade Agreement, etc. And whatever these rules and regulations has been begin in India or by the Indian government, it always have a net impact of the on the export performances and trades. So this is how the you can say the regionalism plays a very significant role, where which is also a part of WTO and its member states. So whatever the reasons regional air trading agreements to would be occurred, it always having an agreement between the member country like India and the WTO, and accordingly the rules and regulation is to be followed to come forward and have a free trade on that particular regional area. The next concept is bilateralism and the multilateralism. Bilateralism, in other words, we can call a bilateral trade agreements are the two-way agreements on trade between the two countries by following up or to extend the specific privileges which is not extended to others. It is a widespread concept in the 1930s with the countries who are trying to protect themselves from the fall in international trade during the Depression. So while India has always been focused on the role of the multilateral trading systems, and it always active in the some of the agreements which always exist between the two countries only, and that's why it's called bilateralism or bilateral trade agreements. So it always when some of the important bilateral agreements of India with other countries are, that is early harvest scheme with Thailand, India, that is New Zealand, that is FTA, that is foreign trading agreement, and the comprehensive economic council schemes, that India Canada foreign trade agreements, India Australia, that is the common economic, you can say, committees, area, etc. So this is all about the bilateralism, where the agreements on trade exist between the two countries without extending that privileges to others. The next concept is multilateralism, where we talk about the multilateral trade agreements, where these are the agreements to focus on the global trade and development, where the agreement on trade to be exist between many countries, and whatever the rules and regulation has been imposed is to be by the World Trade Organization, and the ministerial decisions under WTO, it could be conducted at different conferences which mainly focused on agriculture, cotton, or any other issues related to the least developed countries. And of course, these issues, which also covers the public stock holding for food security purposes, spatial safeguard mechanism is also being implemented for the developing countries as well. And there is always a strong commitment to using of the multilateral trade agreements to abolish the export subsidies for the farm exports in developed countries, and how to measure really and how to take up measures related to the cotton sector. Decisions are always being made in WTO on the preferential treatment on least developed countries in the area of services, and whatever the criteria has been decided and how export is to be done from the least developed country, that is also beneficial to the member nations countries or countries. Next, we talk about what is labor policy. A labor policy is a direct regulation or the active regulation of the labor market, where it involves the promotion of work and return to work. So the labor is a primary source where the most of the households gain and sustain income. And the goal of such policy is to help all the people who are able to work to secure to find their a way to secure their jobs, and of course support a dignified livelihoods. So the Ministry of Labor, the Government of India and its administration is also taken various provisions of compulsory notification of vacancies for the organized sectors of the economy, which comes under the employment market information surveys, which covers all of the establishment in the public sector in respective of the size, and the non-agriculture organizations in the private sector were employing more than 25 workers on a compulsory basis and 10 to 24 workers on a voluntary basis. So this is a policy which has been implemented by the Ministry of Labor, Government of India, in case of applying or putting up a new rule in the labor policy, which has to be followed by the public organizations. Another important survey which has been done, that is the annual survey of industry, which collects the industrial data or statistics in India, which covers all those factories which are registered under the Factories Act 1948. And according to the survey, all factories employing 10 or more workers if they are using power, and 20 and more workers if they are not using power. So this is also a survey which has been conducted, and the results are all factories who are employing 10 or more workers, if they using power, if more than that, if they are not using power. So this is all about the labor policy. Next one is the labor laws for organized sector. The first one is Factories Act 1941. So this act as the factories is the premises where the manufacturing process is to be carried out by 10 or more person if they're using power. If not, 220 or more persons will be considered. So this act is always refers to the registration of factories which always follow the provisions, working conditions related to the health precaution of workers, welfare and safety of the workers, the conditions about the home and work, working hours for adults and children, and the maximum work hours has to be fixed at 48 hours a week. The next act is the Plantation Labor Act, that is 1951. The conditions of the workers employed in plantation work are regulated by the Plantation Labor Act, that is PLA. This act is always applies to the plantation of coffee, rubber, and chinkona. So the plantation, all the plantations are required is to be registered under the registration officers appointed under this act, that is Labor Act 1951, or the Plantation Labor Act as well. So the provision of the PLA that is mainly deals with the health and the welfare, you can say measures, and such measures are related to the drinking water, medical facilities are available or not, crèches, recreational facilities are also available or not, educational facilities, housing for workers and their families as well. So all these facilities are actually included or not, that to be checked on by the, you can say, registration officer, where the such particular factories are to be registered. The Mines Act 1952. The Mines Act provides for health, safety, and welfare of the workers who are employed in mines. So it's just a evacuation operation carried out for the purpose of obtaining the minerals. So this act is always focused upon the health and the welfare provisions for those working in the mines. And of course, the person who has not attained the age of 18 years is restricted for working in a mine. The next act is the Contract Labor Regulation and Evolution Act 1970. So this act is to regulate the employment conditions of the contract workers and provides for its evolution in certain circumstances. The next act is the Interstate Migrant Workmen Act 1979. Indian industries which always considered a good number of interstate migrant workers, and the Interstate Migrant Workmen Regulation of Employment and Condition of Service Act, which always view to protect the migrant workers from the exploitations in the garment factories or in the industries. So these are the acts which always favors to the workers who are working in the factories or industries. And the last act is Child Labor Abolition and the Regulation Act 1985. It is estimated that the large number of child workers in the world are in India, and the Child Labor Act, it's restricted the employment of child below the age of 40 years in factories and hereditous employment, which include the glass and glassware, fireworks, matchmaking, and of course any type of carpet vaping. In such cases where children are always allowed to work, and in this way this act regulates the working hours of a child. And the next one is employee relations laws. The first one is Trade Union Act 1926. Such act as always provides the to registered trade unions, and of course create a countervailing power in place of the working class. So it's an act where to it's an act where all the employees are actually work under a peaceful environment, which are always ruled or controlled over the trade unions in the factories, and all the employees employed in industries, including managers, can become a members of the Trade Unions Act. The next one is Industrial Employment, that is Standing Orders Act, that is IESOA. It also defines the condition of work from different categories of the workers and their employment rights as well. This act applies to industrial establishment who are employing 10 or more workers. And the last one is Industrial Dispute Act. It always focus on the statutory machinery for dispute regulation. So there always a dispute regulatory or grievances cell which always covers the complaints of the workers, and of course protect their individual and collective interest and rights. That's it for today. So I will come up to the more and more important and relevant topics in the upcoming session. So till time, thank you for listening this lecture, and namaste to all.